Sorry, Kiki's whining. She hasn't sent me a message yet. It'll just take me a wee minute to let everybody in. Okay. Okay. Now some more people might join us, so just keep an eye on that. I just wanted to basically introduce Roberto Uribe Castro, is that right? And Itamar Goff, who'll be taking part in a kind of experimental improvisational conversation this evening. And they've selected images to trigger associations and influence the direction of this conversation. Roberto is a Colombian artist, and he graduated as an architect from the Universidad de los Andes, and he holds a master's degree in spatial strategy from Weissensee School of Arts in Berlin. He's worked as a field researcher for urban studies and as a studio manager for Doris Salcedo and Mona Hatoum in site-specific installations, and these collaborations have been really influential in his work. Itamar Goff is an Israeli artist and one of ArtLink's artists in residence this year. In recent years, he's been involved in different art and film initiatives, exhibitions, festivals, workshops, and publications, including Documenta 14, the Berlinale, and the Berlin Critics Week, collaborating with institutions such as the Haus der Kulturen der Welt. And most of his projects evolve around the intersection of art and politics, challenging the border between truth and falsehood, and raising doubts about what artworks purport to represent, questioning the idea that there can be a single official truth. And central to his work is the representation of different forms of personal, collective, and institutional memory. And by coincidence, both Roberto and Itamar are currently living in Berlin. So the background to the discussion tonight is Roberto's Quarantine Diaries project, which is on ArtLink's Instagram and in physical form at Fort Dunree throughout May. So just a brief bit of background on where this came from. When his father died in 2008, Roberto lived away from his home country and became aware of just how long he was away from home and the difficulties of keeping track of the days passing. So he decided to document the passing of the time through an object, just a familiar object that he and his mother could keep until they met again. So they decided to keep the leftovers of the cakes of soap they used and share them at their next meeting. And then Roberto was back in Colombia when the pandemic took hold, and he was trapped for several months at his mother's house. Trapped doesn't seem like the right kind of word, but his mother started to show him the soaps she'd been saving, and then Roberto began photographing them and posting the photographs on Instagram, photographs of his mother's soaps and the ones he was using during the lockdown. And this became a kind of calendar marking the passage of time when quarantine made it difficult to separate one day from the next. And then soon other people started to send photographs of their soap from different parts of the world. And then on his Instagram account, this developed into a kind of worldwide collective portrait of a quarantine diary. Excuse me, I'm just going to admit some people. And although more than a year's passed since the beginning of the pandemic and the start of this project and the first lockdown, the reflections that Quarantine Diaries invites are still relevant and necessary today. The project raises awareness of the overlap between the personal and the collective, the intimate and the public, the hygienic and the infectious, the material and the digital, and as an invitation to consider everyday life in the midst of the pandemic and reflect on what this past year has been like and what it means for our future. So this event's going to explore these experiences that changed our perspective and all sorts of experiences that have changed our perspectives, so that afterwards we return to the world renewed and changed and perhaps enlightened. And so the artists have selected images that change their perspective entirely and made them see things in an entirely new way. So I'm going to kind of pass over now and kind of start this discussion, this conversation, and pass over to Roberto and Itamar.
Itamar, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, just thank you first of all for this opportunity to have the conversation with Roberto. It's a very interesting coincidence that we are quite curious about the same directions, about the same themes. So it's great. I don't know if you want to say something a bit about the whole thing of the changing images. That's the point of this talk, was that we collected different images that mean different things for us, that could be some sort of a trigger for a conversation or something to refer to. It's an experiment, so it's not so clear what it would lead to. But yeah, maybe Roberto, if you want to explain a bit more about your project, or about just elaborate a bit about what's being presented now in Dannery.
Well, thank you also, Martha, for the invitation, and Itamar for joining for the conversation. Like Itamar mentioned, it's a happy coincidence. Everything around the exhibition right now that is having an analog shape in ArtLink, and the digital part that is having taking place on the Instagram account of ArtLink are somehow related to topics that we both share, and let's say curiosities and questions that we both constantly reflect on our works. So that's why we thought it would be more challenging to talk about images that are not necessarily works of ours, but rather images that trigger ideas, because as the connections in the exhibition right now are different images sent by different people from different locations in the world at different moments, but at the same time they create a link between them. That's something that I try recurrently to do with my work, and also Itamar's work. It's a relationship between ideas, images, and history, and different ways to connect them. So yeah, that's somehow it's the origin of this experiment and the conversation, to see what connections we can both make from images that for us have a meaning, the way that we also try to reflect that on our work, installations also, and sculptures. So yeah, that's a little bit the idea. Like here, what well, we will see today, it's basically that. So collection of ideas that's going to be reflected on the images.
Yeah, while we wait for these images to come up, I mean, do you want to maybe talk a bit about the I'm quite interested in how you feel that this work changes, that one of the things that I thought it'd be nice to explore was the analog versus the digital, as we were saying, that there's these dual things, and how this project evolved, and how you feel it's changed in this invitation by ArtLink to make it a physical exhibition at Fort Dunree, and the different kind of audience that you get from that experience.
Well, that for me was a challenge, for many reasons. One of them is the first time that I'm not present to install the actual work. That for me was this time kind of new. But I think it's also related to the work itself. It all kind of evolved in its own nature. The open call happened almost naturally. People just start sending me pictures, friends of mine, and then some followers on Instagram. From then on, I decided to make the open call, and then I like kind of structure it with an invitation and trying to do like progressively, like more organized and to create a file. And then it just, the idea of how it would be presented physically, I didn't have it that clear. But when you invited me to make the analog exhibition, then it's when the first time that I could visualize it, how it would be like for it to be presented on reality. So that's a little bit, and for me, it's also the idea of like working with photography of other people was also new, and acknowledging that for me was relating them and just basically serving as a medium to organize the calendar was something that I also kind of tried to work with other things, but the medium photography was in some way kind of new. But maybe I'm thinking about it, the presentation, but yeah, so it was challenging, especially the fact of not being able to install it physically, and I just like had to like work also with a team of ArtLink in Ireland, and like getting pictures, images from the location, and with that crossing with the information of measurements, and then trying to imagine how it would look. And I'm very happy with the outcome. I'm very of course I would have liked to see it in person, but it's also a part of the topic now, the pandemic. It makes us work in other new ways, and I think it's as an experiment as this conversation is. So this is the first image that I don't know if you guys know. This is a photography of Hiroshi Sugimoto, and well, when we were talking about the topics, and from there on, like how things at some point change your vision and your way to understanding things. For me, this exhibition of Hiroshi Sugimoto in Berlin, and then Neue Nationalgalerie, was also like a breaking point. It was understanding another way of relating to images. So that's why I also wanted to put this image here, or to invite it to this conversation, because his way of thinking photography, not just to making photography, but to think about them, it's something that I liked very much when I saw the exhibition. And somehow when I started working on the quarantine diaries, that's what you see also, what makes it so emotional. It's like to see what people have in their minds when they take the pictures, and make you relate in another way. So that's a little bit the invitation of that image. This is also one of those discoveries when I was a student, Gordo Mata Clark, and the work of splitting. For me, it was the moment that I understood that architecture as just design exercise wasn't enough for me to work with. It was much more in the architecture and the stories behind the buildings, and the way to make the spaces and the actual construction to communicate. That was for me like a mind opener. I don't know But Ismar, do you want to say something about the last images and this
But
one?
I mean, did you study architecture? No, or did you?
Yes,
Ah, yeah, okay.
story architecture. Actually, I did 1 year in Dublin, in at the DIT.
Mm.
So that's also what I like so much, the invitation from ArtLink.
This
But then,
yeah,
but
interesting.
then you decided to leave it and to move to art, or it was some sort of a parallel path.
Yeah, it was kind of a coincidence. I was kind of like in a momentum of change in architecture. Let's say from the analog idea of drawing by hand and using models with the digitalization of information in architecture. And I mean, I've done the step, but back in the beginning of my career, I was very still hold on the drawing and on the actual manual work. So that's a little bit how I make the step into the arts. This one is yours.
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, I'm very interested in the let's say in the limit or the border between the authentic and the fake, and especially in regards to museums or cultural institutions that are open to the public. And one of the most amazing or crazy moments I had was when I was in Istanbul, and I went to the Topkapi Museum, to the palace, where they have very, very big collections of jewelry, of weapons, of ceramics. And next to each object, there is a small label with what the material, the year, more or less, it was made. And there was one room that, as I was walking, became more and more peculiar for me, because the setting was a museum setting. There were vitrines, there were small labels with this very objective information. And there was, I don't know, the sword of this and this sultan from the 16th century, and there is a sword. And then suddenly there was the sword of King David, 10th century BC. And this was a moment that I really thought, okay, interesting, something here is interesting. I'm not fully understanding what is happening here. But then from one object to the other, it became more and more crazy for me, that it became the staff of Moses, the staff with which Moses parted the Red Sea for the Israelites to leave Egypt, was there, a stick behind the vitrine. And then there was the turban of Joseph, so some sort of a cloth hat that was just like placed on a pillow. And the highlight of the thing was the cooking pot of Abraham. So there was a pot, a metal pot, and it said the cooking pot of Abraham, 13th century BC. And this was really a moment that I was completely overwhelmed and excited, actually, because it was an amazing manifestation of how constructed our museum experience is, because there is some sort of like an imaginary contract, let's say, that I am entering a museum and I know that what I'm being presented is some sort of, I don't know, the result of a very elaborate research of a team of experts. Like I am educated to know that the museum is some sort of a possessor of the truth, that they know what they are saying, the people of the museum. And I found it very interesting, this opportunity, let's say, to look at an object that I would not, let's say, perceive as a real object or as an authentic object, but within these settings that I imagine a big part of the public that is there, why not? I mean, this is the sword of the Sultan, this is the cooking pot of Abraham. What is already the difference between the two? And this was for me just an amazing moment of just like taking this thing of how constructed our museum experience is into my own way of looking at the world, but also at museums in general. And it was a trigger for me to start playing with this thing. So what we saw, and it will come back later, is a forum, because after I was in the Topkapi Palace, I was just so excited about this thing that I thought that for sure people wrote about this thing, like about this whole, specifically about the fact that artifacts are being presented as if they belong to biblical figures. And I was sure that someone would have something interesting to say about it. But from looking online, all I found was these forums that are very serious with questions and answers of, can you actually see the stuff of Moses in the Topkapi Palace? Yes, you can. It costs like this and this for the ticket. You can go there. It's in the 5th room in the 2nd corridor. And I actually just thought it's amazing.
Now that you're mentioning it, I was recently in Cologne, and I've been living in Germany for a couple of years, and I have to admit that, I mean, like my own fault, I didn't know that the huge, majestic cathedral of Cologne is built around exactly what you're saying about this idea of the Middle Ages. They brought the three magic kings. You say that in English?
Yeah.
They stole them from Venice and they brought them to Cologne. And that's what so many people, so many pilgrims came to, to visit this holy place.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it puts in immediately, it brings also immediately to the discussion everything that has to do with religious relics, actually. Because why not? If there is the bone from the hip of Paulus, why not having the cooking pot of Abraham? It's about the status of the object and about the institution that gives the identity to the object much more than the actual thing that is in the box.
Yeah, it's what like the idea of history as we know it. It was for, at least to me, it was always like a finished product. It was like a thing that you have to learn. And what I find it so exciting about like new theories and the new research, it's to question what we acknowledge as our history. I think it's one of the what happens that is so exciting, and yeah, in sociology or in architecture, or it's to look into the past and start questioning like what was the intention behind that statement. So it's I like there's a passage of a text of Octavio Paz where he describes that comparing Latin American history with European vision of history, that it's always straightforward and in one direction. He said something like Latin American history is not linear or in zigzag, but it's more like a dance. Like you go 2 steps forward, 1 on the side, 3 backwards, 1 to the other side, 1 to front. Like you're making rounds. But I think what I like from this vision of history is, I think the whole world is kind of like joining that way of thinking about our history.
I would also say that now to look at history as some sort of a linear like thread is gone, or at least on the way to be gone.
Yeah, like it's it's one of the most exciting things that I see happening now, and maybe I'm jumping into troubled water saying this, but it's like the idea of like tearing down monuments, not because of the action of it, but it's because it's physicality of question what is behind all this image. You know, it's not only the history behind the person, but the history behind the producer of that image. So
yeah, exactly, and of the narrative that this image is representing or is supposed to perpetuate, let's say.
Yeah, it's
But do you think it's wrong to pull down the monuments, or it's constructive to pull down the monuments?
you go first, Hidmar. I jump on this one.
No, I mean, I don't know if I'm in the position of saying anything about it. Clearly, there is no reason for any kind of a person in general, not to mention a person that causes or caused in the past pain and horrendous, how do you say, that brought catastrophes and horrible experience to societies, to people, to populations. Of course, there is no reason that this person would stand on a high pedestal in the middle of the street, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, for me, it's I agree with Itamar. I would add to that from my perspective, or from my, let's say, education, I would throw on the table the idea of deconstructing, you know, what we have learned and we have kind of processed with the time and with the things that we had before. And for me, someone who was trained in architecture, always looking into the buildings as these magnificent constructions where culture and future of a society was envisioned, and basically living, and that's something that we almost have from modernity, and I'm calling modernity like around 20s to 60s architecture. This idea of like the body wasn't elegant, so like the action, like this idea of this still image, like of this drawing or this photo that is perfectly clean, where maybe one person walks just to give us an idea of like the measurement of the people. And what I like from this confrontation is like the idea of this static image versus the action versus the body, and how a feeling is being lived by communities that need that to say. So I think it's something to be listened to more than to think if at the end it's just an object. And as an artist, also makes me think a lot about the taboo that we have on art. You know, like,
it's funny because I mean, it's not talking about kind of figures, but I sometimes think my background is Irish, Scottish, where we live. Obviously, it's a colonised place as well, and there are elements of architecture around here. There's old Napoleonic British-built forts like Fort Dunree, or another one near the town where we live. And sometimes I think there's things about, and this is kind of sticking my neck out as well. I think there are times when I've seen, I think it's changing, but where it's like certain bits of Irish history are ignored because they're British Irish history, even though they're still part of the history of this country. But it's like, no, that's not our Celtic history, so therefore it's not our history. I do think probably all the Irish people that are here will jump on top of me and say no, but my background's Irish too, but I come from a background where I look like a lot of people here, where it's a whole mixture. It's much more nuanced. Our kind of genealogy is a whole mixture. People from this part of Ireland and people from Scotland are very connected historically, and So I just think that it, like Fort Dunree or this other Napoleonic fort, or all these kind of institutions of the colonisation of Ireland are kind of, they're part of us too. But there's this thing of rejecting this thing as well. And I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure. It's still history, so it shouldn't be rejected, I think. It's still part of the history.
Well, that's also like, I'm just thinking, listening to you, Martha, about the very peculiar moment that we're having this conversation, you know, like Itamar coming from Israel and what is going on right now. You know, it's like history, it's never ending, it's never stops happening. And it's like, and me being from Colombia, the unrest it has some similarities in that, of course, there are plenty of differences, but there is an unrest that you feel people need to express. And maybe this image is a good like counter position of that, you know. It's the idea of, and what liberates me from architecture was this idea of organizing everybody's life through space. And something that I always like to question is why is being organized, and what is being organized as well also, and what is behind this organization, what is that unorganized means, what is that thing that we are organizing. And maybe that's the reason I also brought this image here for discussion.
But can you say a bit more about it, or where is it, or?
Yeah, this is a Calder, a sculpture called Flamingo, and it's on a plaza in Chicago. And then you have these two buildings which are like iconic by Mies van der Rohe. So it's like these two iconic characters together making this image of the public space of a major city. What I like is it happens around a very interesting moment for me in the discussion of art in public space, which is one of the things that I like the most. And it's this idea of everything has a place. You know, the architecture is there to create a facade. The plaza is perfectly organized, and then comes the sculpture in red and makes a decoration, so to speak. So it's I like that image because of it confronts me as an architect a lot. And I have to say, I saw this image and I didn't get it what it was.
This is the stuff of Moses in the Topkapi Palace. It's a photo from the internet because it's forbidden to take photos there. And I actually tried to take photos and I was kicked out. So I don't have any photos of it. And I was looking, and this is someone who managed to take a photo, and you can see clearly the reflection because it's behind the vitrine. So there are these, you can see the room actually and the small light of the camera. But this is the staff, for example, one of the objects that are there.
Oh.
But I think it's amazing, actually. I think it's it really gives an opportunity to question everything that we know about cultural institutions. Not only, I mean, this very specific case is I mean, it's in Istanbul. It's not. I don't know if it makes sense to just put the entire, like all the cultural institutions of the world in one pot. Probably not. But I mean, this is a capital of an empire, just as London was the capital of an empire. And I think that this gives an opportunity to put in question also what we see in a museum in London. It's not that because this is in Istanbul, it's a different world and they have their own standards or set of values about what is an exhibition. I think it's really, because clearly there are, I mean, the point here is basically that this thing that we perceive as truth or some sort of objective knowledge or some sort of objective presentation of history or of artifacts that are supposed to tell some sort of historical narratives. All these things should be put in question. They should not be taken for granted. And I like this very extreme example of the Staff of Moses or the cooking pot of Abraham, because it forces you to question what it is that you are seeing behind a vitrine with a label, with a small label with very dry information of the time in which it was produced. Yeah,
I agree what you said with the not to put all the talking about pot, not to put all the institutions in one pot, but I want to ask you which do you know which year is that museum from, or like around what period is built?
So it used to be the palace of the Sultan for many centuries. It became a museum, if I'm not mistaken, when the empire collapsed. So after First World War. I'm not sure that immediately it became a museum, but it is from the past 100 years. This kind of exhibition with labels, with audience that is entering. Yeah.
No, because in that sense, I would put a lot of museums in what you said, like in one pot, because I mean they do serve, or many of those institutions were born in a historical moment where they serve a purpose of create a political discourse.
Yeah, exactly.
So and that's what I was asking you. And it makes sense because, for example, we live in Berlin, and here was a conference where Otto von Bismarck with other big nations decided how to divide Africa.
Yeah, of course.
And Turkey or the Ottoman Empire was part of that conversation. So it does make sense that organizing the world, you try to organize, like a way of looking at things and a history that is accepted, and how you would like to present it. You need to support it with evidence.
Yeah, I mean, in this photo is also actually relating to the whole discussion of what is being presented in museums and why, and like the status of an object. So this person is his name is Thomas Harvey, and he's holding the brain of Albert Einstein in a jar, and or as you can see, parts of the brain. It's not an entire brain, because after Einstein died, I don't know who decided to take out his brain in order to see what is there, because he was perceived as some sort of a genius. So people wanted to understand whether there is something physical in the brain that made him smarter, let's say, than other people. And the brain was taken out, and it was stolen from the lab where it was kept. It was stolen and chopped into pieces in order to understand what is inside. And after some years, I'm not so sure about the times, but some years passed, and these pieces were found, and they were taken back to I'm not so sure, it was some sort of an institution in the United States. They were given the pieces of brain back. And now it's being presented in the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. So there is a shelf with a jar that we just saw with pieces from the brain of Albert Einstein. And this also is something, I was in Philadelphia for a project maybe 3 years ago, maybe a bit more, 3.5. And I went to this museum, and I suddenly saw this jar, and I was completely horrified and confused. And I was really asking myself, but why is this thing being presented here? What does it mean? Like, does it give some sort of prestige to the institution that they own this piece of brain? Does it, like, what is the purpose of showing this thing? Because why does a museum even show something, especially something like that? It's not something that was, it's not like an ethnographic, ethnological museum with pieces from some sort of an archaeological digging somewhere. It's a piece of brain of a person that is being presented as some sort of a curiosity. I'm not so sure, but this just makes me think, what makes an object worthy of being presented in a museum? Like who is the one that is saying this piece of brain is interesting and this piece of brain of this person is not interesting? So also this case for me was really a moment in which the system like manifested itself, really brought itself to the surface of the water, let's say, and really made me think about the whole structure of power, you can say, of the power of an institution to say this is important enough for the public to see. Yeah, and I think it's very exciting actually to think of objects that are being presented in museums as getting their importance, let's say, or their significance from the mere fact that the institution has decided that they are worthy of being presented. And I think it's, yeah, exactly.
I'm thinking, with what you're saying makes me think of of the idea of how the power always uses almost the same kind of structures, and in that sense, what is the actual thing that as artists we do? You know, like someone said to me, like, if you want to follow through history, the origins are like the follow of power, just follow the tower. You know, like you have the church with the towers, and then you have the factories with the chimney. And now you have, with the energy and communications, you have the towers. But when the image of the heart, it's kind of like also the dissection of the body. You know, it's the same about the saints objects that were so precious in the Middle Ages, and that were like,
yeah, of course, yeah, exactly.
So basically it's the same images, just like they change slightly, and but it's basically using the same images.
Yeah, and he's kind of like a contemporary saint.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is an amazing picture here. Somebody has to talk about this picture.
This is a personal hero to me. This is an image of Roger Casement, an Irishman, and he's in La Chorrera in the Amazon of Colombia, between Colombia and Peru. I just by coincidence knew about him by researching, doing a proposal for an exhibition in Ireland that didn't happen, but but I was fascinated with a historical figure like Casement, and that goes to the other option. It's like the histories that people hide. You know, Roger Casement is basically the father of human rights as we know them today. But the fact that he was homosexual at his time became, let's say, his weak spot. And by the time he was fighting for the island's independence, he was condemned to death in London. And the reason that I choose this picture is in La Chorrera, where this picture is taken, they celebrate till this day his birthday, the indigenous people of Colombia. And that makes you think of where history stays and where history is really, not saying on which side you're history. It's like what we're saying, it's in constant elaboration, and there always will be, I mean, to the eyes of today, his posture will be like seen as maybe patronizing, but at the time he was engaging with them and he really fought for their rights.
I don't think it looks patronizing. I don't know.
Amazing.
The thing is amazing about that picture is it just looks like a guy along with his pals, you know?
Yeah.
That's really unusual for a photograph of somebody that looks like a colonial kind of figure in a place like that with, you know, a tribe. And it's like a snapshot. It's like somebody's family snapshot. You know, that's what's so amazing about it, I think.
Yeah, I like the figure of Roger Casement a lot, because for me it embodies all the injustices that history makes on every single aspect of his life. The way he realized, or he managed to, I think realize would be the word, how the modernization of Europe into Africa, because the first time he goes is to Congo to check some issues that were reported of in slavery again, when supposedly was like over, and he goes and checked, and because of his report is that Leopold II, the king of Belgium, loses his private colony of Congo. Basically that you know, like that the major thing he did, and the reports about that, and how he explained that he was so disappointed of the idea of Europe, what Europe was doing at the time with these countries. And then when he visits Amazon and the fact that he visited Colombia, and is where he makes the second report, and it's in many ways is an iconic travel. Also the hacienda that he visited, La Araucana, it's like also part of Colombian history. That the funny, or not funny, it wouldn't be the word, the irony is that right now what's going on is still in that image. You know, it's the injustice with a community, with a group of people is happening right now, and the people are protesting against that. So it's it's again this loop where we're talking about history, that it's never linear.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn on the light because I think it's getting dark here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But this is quite an engaging image, isn't it? Here still, it's funny coming back to that after all the richness of all the other images, and it's almost like an image emptied out. You know, I mean, his images are never simple to kind of contemplate, I don't think.
Well, I don't know, Itamar, for you, I mean, like, there's something that happens in Colombia at the moment, or like in Latin America, I think it's very common that all theaters are turned into like these kind of Catholic churches. So it's kind of like the staging of the ritual. This has a new space. Like, you know, the theaters were running down, they were left empty, and people just like start renting to gather people. And in Bogota, at least where I come from, at some point there were every single old theater, like these classical theaters, became like a church from these Christian churches, I think they're called. I don't know if you have them, but I know you're interested into cinema, Itamar. If you have any thoughts about that.
The thing with cinemas and churches, actually, I find very interesting. Also in Brazil, it happens now recently in the past years, that many old cinemas just become churches. So it's actually quite amazing, I think.
That's incredible. It's quite funny, because when I think about that, I think about growing up in Glasgow, and most of a lot of churches ended up being other things like dance halls and bingo halls, and we went the other way, you know, in the kind of 60s and 70s, well, in the 70s and 80s, yeah. So maybe people are getting more religious again, but it's, yeah, there's obviously a connection between entertainment and religion.
Yeah, exactly.
So something I was thinking the other day when I was, and goes back to the idea of the discourse and the images is, I don't know, like in England, but here in Germany happens a phenomena that they have like they create these huge studios around the 2030s. In Rome, I know there's Cinecittà, and yeah, you have always a Hollywood phenomena that is like the biggest one, but also in Mexico was a big movement of cinema, and they all became a kind of propaganda, a political propaganda, and it still somehow works still today. It is another way of creating these scenographies, scenarios of history. And I see there a link to your work, Itamar.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I agree very much. I'm trying to think if we should. Maybe I should say something about the rhinoceros that will appear in a bit.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
As because the image is the conclusion of the thing. But another story that I find completely incredible. One of the things I'm very excited about is, let's say, micro histories or very small incidents, or not very small, but small particular incidents that happened in history at a certain point in a certain place that tell actually a very big, that are able to somehow present a very big image of an era or of a certain place. And one of the stories that really goes with me for a few years now is a story from Portugal in the 16th century, in 1515, that the governor of Portuguese India, so Goa was a Portuguese colony, and the Portuguese governor in Goa sent a ship to Lisbon, to the King Emmanuel I, with many presents from Goa. And one of the presents was a living rhinoceros, a male grown rhinoceros that actually was the first, upon its arrival to Lisbon, was the first living rhinoceros on European soil since the time of the Roman Empire. So it was some sort of a completely mythical animal that no one in Europe has ever seen for the 1,500 years prior to this arrival of the rhinoceros. And the king named him Ulysses, the rhinoceros. And it was presented in Lisbon in one of the squares in a very big cage, and people from all over Europe came to see this rhinoceros. And at a certain point, the king was so excited about how popular the rhinoceros is that he decided to send it as a present to the Pope, Leo X. And so the rhinoceros was given a green velvet collar with the flowers that represented the Portuguese. There is a very elaborate tradition of Portuguese weaving. So on the velvet collar there were flowers, Portuguese flowers, and the rhinoceros was put in a box that was loaded on a ship that left in the direction of the Vatican to on the way to the Pope. And then a few days before it was supposed to arrive, there was a storm and the ship sank and the rhinoceros died. And this story I find just amazing from any direction that you can think of. And an elaboration of this, or a development of the story, is that one of the people that came from Europe, from around Europe, to see this rhinoceros when he was still in Lisbon was a merchant from Nuremberg that sent a very precise written description of what the rhinoceros looks like, because it was this mythical animal that no one has ever seen. And it was really like 4 thick legs with like a very descriptive text of the rhinoceros. And he sent this descriptive text back to Nuremberg, where Dürer, the artist, saw this letter, this description, and created this woodcut, which is the rhinoceros, which is today an amazing icon for art. Like for centuries, it has been now a reference to many artists from all over the world. And it was made based on the description. So Dürer never saw a rhinoceros, and he never saw the rhinoceros that was presented in Lisbon. But this is a drawing, and that became a woodcut of the rhinoceros in Lisbon based on a written description.
Fantastic.
And this is also like the story of the rhinoceros as such, I find amazing, really, on any level. The story of Dürer creating this woodcut based on a description of a thing, and this is why also the rhinoceros that he made, that we will see in a bit, I guess, has completely unrealistic elements, because it is an imaginary rhinoceros. It's not a real thing, but it is actually quite accurate for someone that never saw a rhinoceros. But I think it's very interesting in the sense of that you don't have to really see something in order to imagine something. As a concept, you don't have to see something in front of your eyes in order to be able to recreate it, in order to be able to visualize it also on the one hand pragmatic way of reproducing it or drawing it or whatever, but also reacting to some sort of a presence of this thing, reacting to something that is just not there. And in many of my works, I'm working on this exact concept, that what settings does one need in order to react to something that is not there? How can you create emotions, or how can you tell a story about something, to create some sort of a relation between me and something that is actually not there? And I find it this thing of the rhinoceros amazing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it hasn't arrived yet.
I didn't know the story of that picture. It's like I know the image from a long time ago from a seminar. I think someone used it, but not talking about the actual image but also talking about the relationship we have with our nature. But it's very nice, your reflection on the creation of image out of a description. It's
yeah.
It's this. I'm all thinking that it's kind of like the origin of critique. Maybe there is always this fascinating images of science, or like Humboldt, for example, when he traveled. Oh, there it is. It's at least.
So you can see it's not really, a rhinoceros doesn't really look like this, but it's very close. With the shield,
Yeah.
But it's amazing creating this out of just a written description
of an animal. Yeah.
What do you think about maybe opening it up to discussions now? Would people like to switch their cameras on and
perfect
maybe have a chat? Yeah. I'll let you all switch your cameras on. Do I have to invite you all to switch your cameras on, or you can hear anyway? I'd love to hear something about the door with the wall that was there for ages.
Well, I think that it's relates maybe to what Itamar was saying about these small stories. It's this almost like things that you just pass by and kind of consider irrelevant, and are like how those. I'm always looking into what those images or what those things that seems to be off are actually telling something, and I'm always trying in my work to do that, to put something a little bit off so they emerge as a question on the viewer.
Yeah.
But okay.
Just letting people know they can join. And it's on YouTube. It's going to be on YouTube. So if you're not sure about that, then maybe don't switch your cameras on. I was quite intrigued by, I was saying the other day that talking about that whole thing about museums and the agenda, how the agenda affects how they display the objects. I remember somebody had mentioned this thing about a small piece from Anne Frank's diary where she has a piece of soap. Now, probably Adriana, she's more of an authority on Anne Frank than I would be. But when I started to look at that, and then I didn't realise there was such a strong story there about her Anne Frank's father and how he was trying to guide the narrative of her diary and how he edited the diary. And it wasn't until a few years back that the whole diary was actually published. And the Anne Frank House and the Anne Frank Trust that her father set up have very, very different kind of ideas about how to project this history of Anne Frank. And one is very much, Anne Frank House wants to talk about the atrocity of the Holocaust, whereas Anne Frank's father and this is from just very quick research just a few days ago, but the Trust wanted to take a more humanitarian look at the history and look at her as this kind of saintly figure who, rose above the adversity. And I understand that actually the translations of her diary into German were actually not direct translations until quite recently, because they didn't want to project anything negative that said anything about Germans or Germany in the text. I mean, I don't know, Adriana, you were saying you had a lot of involvement with researching Anne Frank.
We have a project that actually ran for almost 2 years, and it was founded by the Anne Frank House and the government of Holland. And the idea was that, the museum that I was directing at the time, which is Casa de la Memoria Museum in Medellin, and the National Center for Historical Memory in Colombia, which is the institution that is kind of in charge of developing the Museum for Historical Memory of the country, which doesn't exist as a building, but as a project. So the idea was that we were going to have a project founded by the Netherlands government to kind of use that methodology of Anne Frank House and to discuss the Anne Frank House. They have an exhibition that they can, you can take it up, it's an exhibition done for you to be out of the museum and to travel abroad and to be exposed in other places. But but the thing is, our project was directly with the Anne Frank House as the museum, because they're the owners of the museum, but they have like the institutional version, or they're the institution that is now holding the pedagogical reflection that is being constructed around the Anne Frank history. And then we knew that it was like a tension, or it was not an easy situation between the Anne Frank House as an institution the father of Anna Frank, and how do you say this word in the Jesus, the philanthropist that is the one which is a kind of philanthropist, very wealthy guy from Holland, who is the kind of the founder of the Anna Frank Museum and Foundation. So yeah, so we knew that, but we were going with the Anna Frank House version of the diary, and it's really based in human rights. And so it's more of a kind of a pedagogical tool to work with kids around the Anna Frank House diary. I'm sorry, Anna Frank diary, to have reflections about, you know, how to prevent that that type of situations happen again. So that was the project that we were involved with, but it was interesting for us to know about those tensions and the difficulties, which that's, for example, what happened quite a lot. Roberto might be aware of when you work in contested societies with a complex past, is usually never easy in the back. You will never have everybody agreeing in the way that you're going to present the history, the narrative, the curatorial process, the people or the groups involved, who has the authority, why these ones and not the other ones. So for us, what was happening with the Anna Frank House and Anna Frank, that was not, let's say, weird or unusual, because that was our day by day in the museum as well. So
yeah. No, it was just that it was a new, as I say, it was a new thing for me, because I'd maybe read that book when I was, you know, like 13 or something, and I hadn't read it since, and it was only the soap. It's one of those accidental things. It was the soap that brought me back to looking at that, and then that seemed to be everything I saw was talking about the things we chatted about when we were talking about this discussion about the idea of authority and truth
and authenticity.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Does anybody have any questions? Anybody in the audience have any questions?
Or comments or?
Yeah. Comments, yeah.
Well, I really enjoyed the discussion. I have a laugh here by myself when Itamar was describing. I'm sorry. I'm gonna laugh about this forever. Abraham.
Yeah, the cooking part.
So good. Oh, I can imagine how happy I would be as a kid, you know, visiting and
of course, yeah, it's very exciting. This is what I'm saying. That it's not to be only mocked. I mean, I would not only mock it. I find it also, there is an exciting element to it.
Yes. Yeah, I've been reading about, I've been reading about collections or collecting. And then in one of the essays is the writer is talking about kids, and that we start collecting as a kid, and how important it is for a kid to have the original, or whatever he thinks is the original object, and how difficult it is for a kid to accept to exchange the original for the same toy, but that for him is not the original.
Wow, interesting. Yeah.
That they did this big experiment, and but most of the kids will like to keep the object that is the original.
Interesting.
It's really interesting. And then I thought about, I remember as a kid that everything that was shiny for me was a diamond, but it was real. I never, like for years, everything that was shiny, I thought, oh, I have a fortune. I own a diamond. And then, at some point you miss that magical way of thinking. But when I was listening to Itamar, I was thinking about that. It's kind of like you're reproducing an experience when you're a kid. Like you don't care if the object is original or not, but how cool it is to think that really that's Moises a stick. How cool, you know what I mean? Like you know that it's kind of true, but it's kind of well, let's think, but I don't know, like that kind of staging or play or performative extent of an exhibition, which I think is very interesting. And well, Roberto's project that is being really inspired as well, you know, like seeing how the project evolved, the pictures coming. Now all of a sudden I want soaps, or I want that soap from that particular color, or oh, that looks so beautiful, I want to have the soap that way in my bathroom, you know, like how that simple gestures start becoming in something else. And well, it's been really interesting.
That Adriana feeds into the adult who must collect the original.
Now I'm gonna buy. Now I can
at
buy.
high expense.
Yes.
So we have a question from Sandra here. Why does society need art? The artist talked about history. If it is linear or not, what role does art have though? That's a big one.
It's a big one. Well, we were talking with Itamar. I thought at some point it's like with this absurdity of the construction of history through the word, like the discourse. And I like that Itamar somehow closed the discussion with, or the talk, or the conversation with the Durer image, because if we as artists, we might not get the image that is perfectly exactly as the real one. We do have an interpretation, and that's the reason I think it's so good to make research, to make, you know, to try to find all the information we can gather from things we find interesting, or we find the need to be told. Maybe Durer found that, you know, this rhinoceros, you know, lost in the sea, needed to be rescued somehow. You know, that the history. I like that image, and thank you, Itamar, for bringing that up, because I think it closes, and maybe that I will use that to answer. It's yeah, I think if we do something, it's trying to create an image as close as we can from the information we can gather.
Yeah. So trying to get as close to the truth as possible. Maybe. Yeah. This nobody got a chance to talk about this image that's on screen now, because we were chatting as it was by, but this is one that really caught me, because obviously the focus of that image isn't the devastation, it's the guy on the right hand side, isn't it? It's his, it's there's something very kind of human, something very, the kind of dip of the guy's head, and there's something very melancholy about that figure in relation to the devastated scene. Whose picture was this? Who's you?
It's mine. I have to say, when I put the image, I didn't thought that it was going to be that relevant to the moment for Itamar and for me right now. It's that's Bogota in 1948, after what is known as El Bogotazo, when still by the date we don't know. I mean, we know many stories, but how many do we not know? We don't know who killed like a political leader that was very popular among the masses before elections. And yeah, it went pretty much as wild as it is right now in Colombia. So I thought this image would like, and goes back to the loop that we were talking about. I don't know if Itamar wants to.
I thought it was Europe.
That's funny, isn't it? At first I thought it was Europe.
So the picture, and I thought it is Itamar pictures, and it's something related with the Second World War. But now I am reading Drogueria. I missed that one. Drogueria. Well, it could be Madrid or something, but
Mm.
well, now I didn't know there was Bogota. Unbelievable.
But maybe in a way, when maybe it's okay to look at it and not know that, because maybe kind of it is a bigger thing about the kind of universal soldier or something, and universal destruction through war, you know, as well as the specifics of Bogota.
Yeah.
But that position of that human being on the right, and the kind of melancholy of that human figure, or that man, basically. Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe to the question before, it's like sometimes I feel like with everything that happens, maybe if there is something that we try to do, is like also someone said to me once that artists, like, you know, you have this classical idea of like the picture, the painting that was like a selected image, most probably cut and paste from different locations or realities, and the idea is to organize kind of the world. Like this is pretty much, sometimes right now it feels the world is pretty much like this. Sometimes I'm like, right now for me, reading and hearing the news of Colombia, and it feels sometimes that you just want to pick up one little thing in all this rubble, you know, like, and try to take care of something that you might find that has some value, and try to show it to
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Rebecca and I had a conversation yesterday about that kind of fragile state that so much of the planet seems to be in at the minute. So many places, even in our small town, there's a huge thing going on, you know. So even in smaller places, there's a fragility, I think, at the minute.
Yeah. I definitely think so. Yeah.
This has been really interesting. I think it's been
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this experiment.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really good. Well, I must say something that now about the story of the Anna Frank house, and I think it has to do also with, well, both Itamar and Roberto, and you know, who owns the narrative, and who owns it, and how you present that narrative is how we, as the rest, will make or create a representation. So that's why I think that what we call history, which is a narrative, is so contested. It's because it's the way that more that, or yeah, which is the one that we're going to end receiving. So it's kind of has the authority to keep passing the information or the details for us to represent in the present something. And that was the discussion in between Anna Frank father and the institution. They have a different idea about what to do with that history, with that story, with that personal experience, with that diary. So the diary itself is a diary of a girl, but then what can you do with the diary and what the diary has become, and something that is also who owns the right to tell the story. So they were basically fighting for the rights to tell the story in the way that they thought it should be shared with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So it's that I think is always there, kind of with the possibility to change who owns the story, who owns the rights of the narrative, and how is that presented to us, and then how we represent that event or a situation that is happening. But I think things are changing too fast at the moment, and that's why we feel like we are in a crisis all the time.
Because the thing is, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to go down the road of saying there is no absolute truth, because then you're down Donald Trump's territory.
Exactly. Or too much information, everything changing in a second. today someone is the authority, tomorrow is someone else, and so I think that's why we feel so like lost or kind of difficult. So in that feeling of we are in a crisis, like something is always going to happen, or in a difficult world, which I think is always difficult. I think this feeling it will be shared by a human being. If we can travel in time, anyone that we meet is going to probably have the same feeling. Doesn't matter the time, but anyway, I think it's unique in that sense of too many narratives and changing too fast, and authenticity and authority really difficult to grasp or to be sure, or
I think, Adriana, just from my listening, and I'm sorry I joined late, I had other meetings with a lady in Canada. The thing you were saying about children having the ownership of this small thing, and sometimes having ownership over small things is the way to navigate through any crisis, because they're your landmarks, they're your power source, they're your calming source, the things that pull your attention away from the horrific situations that go on around you and around the world, and also with the beauty, for me, being generally held in small things. When we pay attention to those, we can open our eyes more readily to the connectivity between every human being, back down to the fingerprint on the soap, I think that there's a huge potential in the narrative, but without having it taken over by one individual's desire to tell it their own way. If that makes sense. Sorry.
Yes, it does.
I think it was good. It's been really interesting there's lots of pictures that nobody talked about, but we've been chatting for nearly an hour and a half, so I don't know whether people feel that we should maybe close now, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think we can conclude this conversation.
We could talk forever about all these things, couldn't we?
Exactly.
Yeah. And there's lots more time to talk. So we don't know when you'll be here, Itamar, but hopefully, this year you'll be able to come here.
Hopefully, the minute it's possible.
Yeah, and people can actually meet you in person. And Roberto, we're hoping we're going to work with Roberto next year on another project, which is a more installation project, maybe more the way that you normally work. You don't tend to work with photography. This is a kind of new thing for you. So, and we'll be letting you know about that as it develops.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
That's been very nice. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the exhibition, for the talk. Itamar, that's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's been great to connect you two up. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And thanks a million, Adriana, for making these connections too.
No, it's really good. They help to think. It's really good. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
People probably don't know that Adriana just lives just up the road in the Buncrana Road, but we've never met in person. We've been chatting for about 6 months. Yeah. So we're looking forward to having a cup of coffee together soon.
So I hope so, yes. As soon as they open the frontier, I'll go for coffee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a million, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.